how do you stand out in all of the different competition that's at play? Well, Gabriella and Bruno's conversation will help guide us through the world of early company building. Before I formally introduce Gabby and Bruno, Bruno, do you want to jump in and share what was your biggest concern when you first started off with your companies?
Yeah, I'll start. On my end, it was finding the best co-founder. For me, I wanted to find someone that shared the same values as I did. I wanted to find someone that was complementary to all my skill sets, and to find both, it's rare. So for me, it was really vetting the right co-founders and finding the right one at the right time too. So lots of variables at play, definitely. And I'll chat through a little bit more of that in the talk, but that was my biggest concern for sure.
Yeah, for me, I think there were three things that were the most difficult things. I think one is finding the right candidates. How do you get people that have the right skills, that are at the right point in their career, that are aligned with what the company is doing and actually interested in joining you? I think the second thing was just closing people. How do you compete with FANG? How do you convince people to take the leap as the company grows? And the third, all of which we're going to talk about with Gabby, is how do you build that recruiting engine when you're recruiting for multiple roles, multiple people, you got people across the funnel, top of the funnel, trying to get them in, you're trying to close. How do you build that engine that doesn't waste the whole team's time? Those are things that we wrestled with.
I'm starting to see in the chat some people that have very similar concerns as they're jumping in. Jerry, also shared that sourcing is hard, finding talent and building that engine is difficult. And Yangsheng shared, will people still want to be on the team now that they're off of FANG or off of the big platform, so to speak? Cynthia shared, engineering talent is difficult to find at any time, especially in the time of coronavirus. And so she's seeing a lot of people that are playing it safe and are risk averse. So it's like, how do you compete in a risk averse world where there's so many other things that are demanding our attention? So some really, really great concerns coming in there. So Gabby and Bruno are going to chat for about 30 minutes. And then we've invited a number of different people in our community to join us live. And so we'll be incorporating and inviting them up live and incorporating Q&A throughout. So feel free to submit your questions in the chat as well. And so I'll be monitoring, Jerry will be monitoring, and we'll be able to make sure we get as many of those answered as possible. This is also being recorded, so we'll have this available after the fact as well. And at the end, we have 30 minutes for speed networking at the event. So you can get to know all of the other potential founders at this event. And so you can start to build this support network in this coalition where you all can help each other find the right talent and tackle some of these early stage challenges. So with that, let me introduce you to our speaker today, Gabriella DeFlorio. So beyond being the CEO and co-founder of Prelay, Gabriella is a go-to-market and sales strategy leader with deep knowledge in early stage team building and go-to-market. As a solo founder, she was able to recruit top technical talent to join her, including a technical co-founder and early technical and non-technical employees. As CEO, she's led the company through Y Combinator, raised millions during COVID, and recruited top advisors, including Jeff Kesser, Box co-founder and SVP of engineering, Quentin Clark, former Dropbox CTO and longtime friend of our community. He's helped support engineering leaders through ELC for a long time, and John Turner, Google Cloud head of sales. Her core approach to life is persistence and perseverance, as learned through her competitive D1 cross-country career. Welcome, Gabriella. It is so great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So next up, we have our moderator, Bruno Faviero. Bruno is currently product manager at Palantir Technologies. Prior to that, he was a co-founder of an AI startup, Synapse Technology, which deployed X-ray screening automation to customers around the world. They were backed by top VCs, including Founders Fund and 8VC. He's also an active startup investor as an angel and founding partner at Graduate Fund. He's backed over 35 startups to date. He studied computer science at MIT and started his career as an early software engineer at Kensho Technologies. Welcome, Bruno.
Thank you, Patrick. Excited to be here.
Awesome. One quick thing before you two take it away. If you are tuning in, you can turn on the live. If you can't see anything, turn on the live stream. There's a little green tab that you can toggle on and off that'll open up the video for you. Okay, last logistics. Okay, so Bruno, take it away. The floor is yours.
All right, let's do it. So thanks everyone for joining. I can't see how many people are in the audience. How many do we have in here, Patrick?
Oh man, I'll have to get back to you. I'll let you know.
All right. The pains of using the new platform. No, exciting stuff. So yeah, I'm excited to chat with Gabby. A little bit of context. I've been friends with Gabby for a little over a year now, and I've seen Prelay go from that ideation stage to where it is now. So it's exciting to talk both about how you've built the team to where it is, which is, you've got top high caliber engineers on the team, but also salespeople, designers. You've got a really holistic team. And so I'd love to talk about how you built that team to where it is today. But first, I wanted to kind of give a little bit of context. A lot of the questions people are asking: how do you recruit people? How do you differentiate yourselves? How do you convince people? A lot of it starts with who you are and what your company is. So going back to that start of Prelay, I'd love to hear about what got you into building a company in the first place, and what drove you to drop everything and start something.
Yeah, just to hit on that briefly. I appreciate the intro, Bruno and everyone. Overall, I mean, I was over at early stage companies prior to Prelay. I never imagined myself being a founder by any means. I actually, if anything, idolized founders across the board, thinking that I would never really touch being a founder. It didn't really become apparent until I really started feeling pain points in my past company around sales and overall kind of inefficiencies there, which I can happily chat on further. But I think the biggest thing that I started realizing was really within myself, what I really brought to the table from a founder perspective, what founders needed to bring to the table, and really being able to align the two. So really got me into being a founder was a lot of the pain points I had seen, but it really just took some time to really realize that I was ready for it, and I was ready to take on the challenge. And really, you really have to kind of dig deep to decide if you're really the right fit to really hop right in.
So tell us a bit more about Prelay. How did it come about, the company that you're working on now, and what is it, to give the audience an idea of what we're talking about?
Yeah, just high level, we drive just collaboration around the whole sales deal. So making sure that each and every stakeholder is involved and they know exactly what frame of reference they're at during the sales process, and really allowing for them all to really be all in one source for that collaboration, really that core reference point. Overall, what we, from my perspective of why I dug into Prelay, kind of already dug into that, but a lot of it's around the core inefficiencies that I saw at my past companies around overall internationalization, around regulations that come up, other privacy pieces that tend to really make the complexities of the sale really come to the surface. So that's really where we make it a lot more simplistic overall. So I'm happy to provide more context as to where I really dug in first. But that was really where I kind of started digging in, was from my past experience, having to navigate through these very complex sales that tended to be pretty international, and overall having those regulations and privacy concerns across the board.
So that's an interesting point. So you've got this great idea, you've got this concept, you've seen the pain point, you have personal experiences with it at your past company, and you have some idea of okay, if I saw this in my previous companies, other companies have this problem too. And so I've worked with, I guess a little bit of context. I don't know if Patrick mentioned, I've also been an angel investor and a pre-seed investor. I've invested in about 35 companies to date as an angel and through the graduate fund. And so, some of these stories, a lot of them rhyme, a lot of them sound very similar to each other. So you've got this idea, you've got this concept, what then? Some people bring in a co-founder right away. Some people try to build things, some people try to sell. How did you navigate those early days on your own with just that idea?
Yeah, I'm fairly opinionated on this, honestly. I think too many people, time and time again, go straight to the solution. I think they start building and they don't really think through if it's the right idea to be hopping into. For me, I wanted to take a step back. I wanted to make sure that this was the idea that I specifically should be working on. So a lot of that was around making sure that I had the specialty within it. I had the expertise, I had that competitive advantage to be able to hop in and know, for the most part, where I should be going, especially since a lot of this can be, as earlier we were talking about, the amount of things you have to prioritize. So it really makes it a little bit easier, at least, but not always easy. Overall, too, I really realized that in the end, you have to get to know your user. Although I was like a potential user of my product in the past, everyone has their own opinions as to how tools should be working, how their different processes are working at their companies, and what could really be improved. So that's where I really, if anything, hopped in, was getting to know the user. It wasn't a matter of building. It wasn't a matter of really digging in from team level. It was a matter of making sure that I was hopping into the right thing at the right time. So I did a ton of user interviews during that point in time, probably hundreds, where I was digging in directly with my core users, getting in front of them through just messaging on LinkedIn, cold messaging. At that point, prior to COVID, I was meeting them in person. Really took a lot of time out to make sure that this was the right thing to be hopping into and really was solving a big pain point for the industry.
Okay, so we're going through the journey here. You've done the research, you found the idea, you figured out, what the direction is. How did you then break that down into something that you could take action on and something that you could build? How did you think about those next steps?
Yeah, so as mentioned, I obviously started digging into those kind of core pain points and digging into also in general, is this the right thing for me? Is this something that I have a competitive advantage with? That's where I started just to synthesize this data around what does the industry need? What do these core personas need? And how can I really make sure that this can become this concrete solution? I also just started thinking through, once I get to this concrete solution, who else do I need on my team as an initial starting point to really build on this? But I would say for the most part, a lot of it was making sure I really thought through the data, really thought through this was a necessary need to have within the industry, not just a vitamin.
Okay, and so you mentioned there you've got this need, you've got this product, a vision. It's not just a vitamin; it's a painkiller. As the old quote goes, you wanted to chop down the tree. You spent the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. So now you mentioned bringing on a co-founder to actually execute on the vision. How did you go about thinking about who you wanted to bring on, and what type of person you wanted to bring on, and how did you navigate thinking through that step of the process?
Yeah, and I guess real quick, just to take a step back to it, I in my mind I was like, should I bring on a co-founder? Should I not? And I really thought through it in the sense of you need to have someone next to you really on the line, making sure that things are moving forward from a general sense. And on my end also, I really wanted to find someone that could really execute on the technical side, especially as we are thinking through the longevity of our architecture and core product from the start. That's always kind of approach I've taken from the start is how can I really lay the foundations on to make sure that we're scaling this company in the best way possible. I really think that oftentimes people, again, take too many, put the cart before the horse in a sense, and don't actually think through the core foundations that need to be built first before you can be able to build out this core scalable company. So when thinking through that core co-founder, it was a matter of just figuring out what my gaps were, figuring out what my values were. What did I really want within a co-founder in that sense? What type of values did I really drive there? So for me, it was, accountability, consistency there. A lot of it was grit as well. That's something I highly value. And obviously really technical ability, but I think it goes beyond just abilities though. It's really those values that can be aligned across the board. So that's kind of the core piece of what I initially looked for, but overall, it's a whole process when going to look for a co-founder and in general having conversations. I mean, you've heard time and time again, there's people that meet their friends, their roommates in college. And in the end, what I've found is it's a matter of finding those values that match up, that align. It's also a matter of finding those people that the timing is right for them. I think that a lot of times people hop in when they're not ready for it. So that's really what I wanted to look for, was someone that was ready to hop in, really take on a large responsibility of building this company for the future, for the coming years, and really make sure, again, that our values were aligned. That was the biggest piece. So specifically on our end, I'm happy to chat through more of this in detail, but we ran through some content around testing out to make sure that our co-founder relationship was perfect. There's a first round content piece around this. Recommend anyone to please go through that. I think not enough people really vet enough and make sure, even though they're a highly credible person, they're incredibly talented, they don't vet enough to make sure that it's really aligned for the future, thinking through that longevity of the overall company, what you want to be shooting for that larger vision, and really making sure that you're aligned as to what responsibilities you want to be taking on for the future. Yeah, not enough people talk through the hard things up front, and that's what you have to do in this situation.
Yeah, so we've got a few things to unpack there. I think one is like, what do you look for in a co-founder? I think you mentioned you've got the soft skills, accountability, consistency. Do they have the right values? And also soft skills, not just in absolute, but as a complement. Maybe if you're someone more diligent, more deep dive, you want someone that can, be more in the weeds, or if you're high up, they're low down. And so you've got kind of that soft skills. How do you build a well-rounded team? That's always a topic that comes up. And of course, you mentioned the hard skills. You've got to think about the long term of the company. Are they going to scale? Their technical ability, their ability to like make sure you're building a sustainable architecture, that you're not shooting yourself in the foot and you deploy something that then breaks, and is really embarrassing for your first early customers, which matter the most. I think thinking about the consequences of bad co-founders is interesting. You made me reflect on my time at Synapse. Your co-founders, your reputations are intertwined, right? Like your reputation with their reputation, with the company's reputation, but also they are, the bastion for the culture, and they have to be the kind of people that are going to be the most energized, the most long-term, and the ones that are going to stick around when things get really tough, because things get tough in every startup. And so those are all good things to think through. Do you have any highlights, maybe from that first round piece you mentioned, of like how to do that vetting, how to do that reference? We can link to it in the chat, but like, what were some of the things that you took away from that on how to vet co-founders?
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of it was more of like more of a conversation, right? It was more of a discussion of what are your strengths as just in general a person that you can be bringing to the table as you're building a company. What do you value? What do you think through from a longevity standpoint? It kind of puts through like situational questions as well for the future. If something hits the fan, what do you end up doing? So it is more of a discussion with your co-founder that you can be doing. So happy to send that over after this as well. I think also there's not enough, if anything, information around finding a co-founder and really thinking through that scenario for yourself. But I think, again, it really does dig deep for your own self, is just thinking through what you really have from the value perspective and everything, even prior to hitting that vetting standpoint with like the first round content or anything of that sort. It's a difficult task, but it's something that you just need to be organized with and really think through how you can get in front of these people as well. And yeah, happy to dig in more too on that end of how to get in front of these people in general.
So for a little bit of context for the audience, when you're building a company, you sometimes don't know how long these things take. How long did it take you to bring on a co-founder? You went from where you were, it's like, okay, I got to bring someone on. I know what I'm looking for. How long did that process take?
Yeah, so I had a goal in the very beginning stages when I really kicked things off back like last June or so, that I wanted to bring on a co-founder, have my core idea, have my core kind of like hopefully ideal solution MVP by the end of the summer. I was able to do all those things. And the co-founder was kind of intermixed with those, but I would say it took me about a couple months or so. But typically I think that's on the faster end. And I really attribute that to really being organized throughout and really being persistent throughout, being prepared with those core data pieces that I had. So all of that data that I'd created from the user interviews, knowing exactly what was needed in the industry, I prepared to make sure that they were aware that I was this expert in this space, that I was ready to be able to take on this challenge, and they were able to hop into not as much of a stable situation by any means, but a little bit more stable than most other founders that may just be hopping in and not really having that organization. And I recommend that to all of you, is making sure that you're organized throughout, really digging into those user interviews so you can be able to just pass that along. So like, for instance, I tossed this into a Notion doc, had a full bank of information that I could just pass along to a co-founder to be able to present to them, potential co-founder, potential early employees as well. My first early employee also showed that information with. It really gave them an idea as to what they would be hopping into up front without even having a company built. So I really think that does drive that momentum in the very early days of bringing on that just even early co-founder or like first employee, is just having that organization of really user research, your backing of the industry, and what you'll be building toward. I don't think enough people do it.
Yeah, no, I think that point, should resonate with everyone. It's like, if you do your homework and you're persistent and you're clearly coming off as someone that's doing this, not only with the right reasons, but with the right information, with the right ammunition of, hey, this is a huge opportunity. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of all this research that I'm pointing to. Then, selling a co-founder is very similar to pitching investors, right? I think when we were bringing on our co-founder at Synapse, I think we sent them our investor deck and we're like, here's all the homework that we did. If we can convince someone to give us $1 million, what do you say? You went through that process, and it's really competitive. You've gotten sold on the idea. So I think the last part, thinking about the co-founder thing here, before we kind of move on to early employees and broader recruiting, how do you convince them to take that leap of faith, like at that moment when you've got no funding or product in tow? I think, people can find friends to hack with them, hey, help me build this MVP. Do you want to come on? But like, how do you convince them to join before you've got the money, before you've got the investors, before you've got the brand, before you've got the customers?
Yeah. It's hard. It's not easy. And to be able to push someone over edge for just leaving right then, like people can be bought into the idea and, think it's a great idea and, be able to go ahead and give you kudos for it. But in the end, it's not really going to work to actually get them to drop their job, especially when I'm sure they're making plenty of money at their current job and they're plenty comfortable. I think what you said around the investing piece, I think is a huge factor here. I mean, with that, it was a matter of building out presentations even for these potential co-founders around what does the go-to-market strategy look like? How can we get our first few customers in the next coming months? How can we make sure that we're scaling up this company from a team perspective as well? What will we need for the next coming months, potentially with a couple new engineers or new hires, whoever it would be? And it goes back to, again, all of that preparation that already came beforehand. You already prepared yourself at that point then. You'd be able to put a lot of this effort into this presentation from what you already were able to build into it with those user interviews and what you had prior, since if you were digging in from your expertise level. It's really rare. But I think, again, the persistence piece is a big piece. I don't think enough people are persistent with trying to close on candidates, especially co-founders. Sometimes you just need to be able to push and make sure that they can just hop on board. Once you have that momentum with a co-founder and potentially just that built up relationship at that point in time, you just have to inevitably be able to push them through that with just selling, honestly. And that selling, again, goes back to what would you produce within an investor deck? Exactly what Bruno said. What would you add as your go-to-market function? What would you add as your core pitch of the product? What would it be in the next 10 years? What could this co-founder be working on in the next 10 years and have ownership over? That's really going to be the big piece that would win someone over to be able to really drop their job and hop on. And seems risky, but actually comes across as way less risky and de-risked if you have that information in front of them.
Yeah, I think there's that aspect of it for sure. It's like that selling on the company, on the idea, on the product, on the market. But I think, one important aspect to mention is also just like the personal fit. Like, I'm sure, your co-founder's like, oh man, Gabby seems like a great person to work with. Like, I want to be in the trenches with her. And I think that's also important. And, you got to get to know these people, and in that persistence, convince them not only that it's a great business, but you're the person that they're also going to be taking the risk on, being on the trenches with, being there during tough times. And so, it's a bit of a holistic process, that whole thing. And I think it's interesting to think about the investor deck. When I said that, I didn't mean necessarily for fundraising, even though both of us raised fundraising very early. I think we raised about $300,000 before we even really moved out here and started working on it. And that was when I quit my last job. But it's like the questions that investors ask are ones that are good to think about and think through. So I've seen companies that build that investor deck at the very beginning before they do any fundraising. And it forces them to think about how big is the opportunity, what's the go-to-market, how do we sequence, the product development. So then kind of moving on from kind of bringing on that co-founder, okay, so you've got this co-founder and you talk a lot about the techniques to think about who you're going to bring on and actually execute on bringing them on. So let's talk about the early team. You've got the co-founder, you've got the product, you've got this MVP, you've got it built. It's a competitive market. You're competing with large tech companies. So how do you think about crafting that early team and thinking about, even in the first place, who do you want to bring on and then how you go after them?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And specifically with this, I mean, obviously, early talent is you have to be very careful as to who you bring on. I think even it goes beyond just an internal team. As you kind of probably saw in my bio, I really have tried to push to make sure that I can get the best surrounding our full company. So across the board from the start, making sure that we had experts in every piece of every department. So specifically brought on Jeff Kleiser over at Box. He was the co-founder. He was the SVP of engineering there, to make sure that from the start, we really had great backing from the engineering perspective and product perspective. I think in general, a lot of founders think that they just have it all handled. I think across the board, even if you have an expertise in something, there's always more to be done and always more to be improved upon. And there's always going to be gaps, especially as being a founder. I'm sure, Bruno, you would agree as well. There's always going to be gaps that you have to cover. And so to be able to have some backing from an expert in the space that's done it before successfully is huge. It really allows you to remove any sort of pitfalls that come up for the full team, even, I would say first 10 employees or even further along the line. So Jeff, obviously was a huge grab for us to be able to make sure that we were bringing on the best talent, being thoughtful around bringing on the best talent, and then also being thoughtful around how we were scaling out our product and our company as a whole. Similarly with like Quentin and John over at Google Cloud, it was a matter of who can we bring on from the product or sales perspective to really be surrounding our company with only people that have really succeeded with scaling out a tech company or have led a tech company, a large one at that in the past. But beyond that, with kind of past that overall advisory standpoint, to really make sure that you're bringing on like the best early team, I think it does go back to similarly with like a co-founder. I also think across the board, to be able to really compete in comparison to a lot of these top companies, you have to be really on your game from the start. I think oftentimes people let the recruiting cycle get away from them in the very early days. So being able to be on top of your game for that first phone call, even with them, making sure that you know exactly what you're looking for, making sure that you know exactly why they would be a good fit for your company, and really making sure that you have that well-defined pitch that you already had for your co-founder, whoever you'd be bringing on earlier on. And I really think, again, it is that preparedness throughout the recruiting cycle that inevitably gets these people won over. Again, I think that's something that stands out in comparison to other startups. I don't think enough startup founders prepare themselves. I think they hop in and again into a solution. They aren't organized in like the amount of preparedness and overall research that they're doing throughout the process. And that is really where you can start to really take it to the next level. Because in a sense, early employees are investing within your company. It's just like another investor in a sense, except a lot of time. And it's a difficult pick for them because they are taking a lot of risks. So how do you de-risk it for them? De-risking it for them is providing all of that information as to why this company will be something big in the next 10 years. So I would say for the most part, like bringing on those early employees, incredibly important to bring on the best, and to bring on the best is to be able to make sure that for one, you can be really pitching from the start, that first conversation all the way through that recruiting cycle. And then additionally, surrounding yourself with the best advisors, the best people of the industry that have done it before, to really be able to leverage that expertise throughout the recruiting cycle, but then also as you're scaling out your company as well.
So how do you think about, it's like not only how you close them, but like who you approach. How do you think about like the seniority and the experience of some of the folks that you bring in early? I mean, I think, if you were to build a company, exactly what you're building, obviously you might go for the Googler with 10 years of experience in that particular stack, or, really seasoned people. But a lot of times it's like, you have to pick and choose who you go after in the first place. So how do you think about kind of figuring out who to approach to bring on at the early stages?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think across the board for any sort of person that you'd be bringing on, they need to be willing to really dig into the weeds. I think so many people want to bring on like a VP level off the bat. They want to be able to make sure that they have, 10x experience. But I really think that it is a balance of someone wanting to really hop in. They probably won't have the opportunity to manage for some time. And it's about being transparent there. I think there's not enough transparency within that kind of recruiting process, where typically there's a misalignment of needs there. And I would say for the most part, it's a matter of finding those people that are willing to really hop in to a startup and want to. Like they find timing in their life is perfect to be able to hop in and prioritize, in a way, the startup alongside of the rest of their life, as well as also really wanting to learn and soak up as much knowledge as possible. I think that's something that we carry on at Prelay as well, is how can you really have this kind of growth mindset? Are you really wanting to learn? Are you wanting to, if anything, just grow your career and be able to work with a team and be able to surround yourself with the best? I think that's the biggest piece, especially joining an early stage startup, is these people should really want to be able to scale up with this team. They should want to be around for a while and not necessarily want to feel like they want to hire off the bat. So obviously, it's all dependent on the type of role you're hiring. It's not a silver bullet. But I would say overall, the ability to select someone that is not going to want to manage off the bat is definitely a recommendation I would have, at least for your first 10 hires. And past that, obviously, it changes a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you bring up something important, which is like, are they going to show up and want to hire and want to manage and be like, all right, I'm here, or are they going to show up and like jump into the weeds, start coding, start, selling. I remember when we were looking for a salesperson, we had someone tell us, you've got to find someone that's actually had to go out and find the leads and do the calls and get people into the pipeline versus someone that's going to show up, be like, all right, where's my leads? Where's my SDR? Where's my sales team? And you're not necessarily going to have that. So I think that's an important flag. It's like someone that's used to managing. If they have the right mindset, they might want to be diving into the weeds. They might be contributing, but sometimes some people are like mentally on that management track and they're just going to be waiting for the day when they can start hiring people. And in the early days, you need as much as you can get out of the people on your team.
Yeah.
So so I want to ask explicitly, because like it's come up at the beginning of the live questions. It came up in the questions people submitted ahead of it. Like, how do you compete with FANG? FANG companies, Facebook, Apple, Google, they've got the salaries, they've got the brand, they've got the machine. Like, how do you tackle that through the recruiting process and close people when, even if you've convinced them they're the best startup in their eyes, okay, but I've got this 400K offer from Google.
Mm-hmm.
Total confidence.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to a couple points I had brought up. So for one, transparency. Two, I'll also dig into kind of more of that expertise and having a great team around you. But I think the first thing that would be great is just transparency. So like overall filtering, right? I think that overall you need to find a team that is wanting to hop into a startup, wanting to take on this responsibility. And I think there's just not enough people that know that they're ready. And that's something that you have to filter out within the interview process. So you have to be asking the right questions of what are their motivations? What is their long-term career goals? Like, what are they wanting out of their next job? If they're wanting to make as much money as possible, or, what have you, probably not a startup. If they're wanting that ownership and they're wanting to be close to the product or whatever it might be, probably a startup. But it's a matter about asking those right questions up front to be able to filter down if this is even the right person to be hiring. Oftentimes the people at larger companies could be not a good fit, but oftentimes they could be a great fit. I've hired, people at larger companies already to date, but they found the timing was right for them. I was able to dig into what their motivations were and why they wanted to join a startup, or specifically ours. And really that, if anything, a lot of the feedback we received was because they wanted to join based upon the team, wanting to have that ownership, and really wanting to be close to that product. So it really is a matter of filtering through the right people. I don't think it's always the answer of competing against FANG, but really thinking through who's the right person for you. Oftentimes you can find some really hidden gems out there that aren't necessarily FANG, but we also, obviously, lots of incredibly talented people at FANG, but it's a matter of finding the right people that are ready to join your startup.
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember we might have been a little too blunt when we'd first talk to someone. We'd say, "Hey, if Google gives you an offer at the end of this process and you're getting 200K base, what are you going to do?" And some of them would say, "Oh, well, like those aren't the ones we hire. The ones that are like, I'm startup, I'm all in. Startups or die. Like startups are bust. I'm going to work at a startup no matter what." And it's like I see so many founders that are like recruiting so hard, and at least 20-50% of that difficulty is they spend so much time with candidates and then they lose out on them. So screening them out at the beginning is so important.
That is a
So I think that,
thing
yeah,
too. Like, I think time saving for yourself as a
yeah,
founder is smart, and you have to do that early in the recruiting process, because if you don't do
yeah.
that, it's going to be a long process, and then you're going to get to the end and realize it's not a good fit, or you'll hire them and it's not a good fit. So you need to really make sure that you're finding your way earlier on with these candidates.
Yeah, it's funny going back to what you said earlier. It's selling, and I think a lot of people approach recruiting very differently. Oh, I know people, I can convince them, I'm likable. But like, you never approach selling like that. You never show up to a company and be like, hey, trust me, I'm really excited about the space. It's awesome. Give us 100K a year. We're going to build amazing things. We're going to do great things together. No, you show up with your homework done, why you're there, why they're there, why they're a good fit, and you disqualify them quickly. Not interested. Awesome, I'll move on and spend all this time on a company that's a good fit. So it's like, it's eerily similar, but people don't seem to think about it that way. So the last question I have, related to like, okay, you've clearly touched on how do you save time? How do you, preempt certain parts of the process? How do you convince people? So internally, how do you build that recruiting engine at the company such that it's efficient, it doesn't suck up everyone's time, and especially during a time of COVID?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think across the board, people, especially at early stage with founders, they do a very ad hoc process, which, there's a lot of ad hoc processes for sure to do in startups. I mean, you have to hack together some things, but this is the last process that you want to do ad hoc. This is probably the most important process that you'll be running at the early stage of your company, is making sure that you really are running through any sort of those questions that I mentioned, digging into those motivations as the first kind of step in the process, really mapping out the recruiting process of what you really need to get out of the candidate, and really learn to really get to that point of a yes, that you need to bring on this candidate. And if you don't know what you'll be, who else you would be hiring. So it's really mapping out the process, thinking through that intro call, thinking through with, dependent obviously on the role as well, but thinking through what kind of skill set you need out of this particular role, and really making sure that you're digging into those questions that go beyond even just capabilities, going beyond just like overall like surface level things. It's more of how can you really dig into why they would want to be joining your startup, why are they wanting to hop into an early stage, and what really motivates them. I think, again, I say that multiple times here because it is incredibly important, and so many people skip over that. But that being said, obviously, it's making sure that you really think through those core tests and think through kind of the overall, capabilities of the person as well. I think past that as well, really thinking through the offers, the comp ahead of time. I think a lot of times people are also very ad hoc with that. They just kind of toss out a number and they think it's the right number. Candidates want to feel like it's a really structured process and that you're really thoughtful around what you're offering them. And I think that oftentimes people don't think through that. They're not thinking through kind of those core overall compensation packages, and really thinking through for the future how you want that pay parity to work. At least at Prelay, we really make sure that we're really thinking through the comp packages. We're really thoughtful around kind of that core recruiting cycle to make sure that people feel comfortable. When they hop in, they feel like we made the right decision and they also did. And yeah, I don't think enough people think through that cycle, and happy to chat through more of that too. But I think it's something that shouldn't be ad hoc. There's plenty of other things ad hoc that should happen in the startup, but that's one of the most important pieces that should be well thought through.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like anything that's well thought through, it's like you got to talk to people that have done it before, learn the best practices, lean on your advisors, and build that whole engine, top of the funnel, how you're sourcing to how you're closing. It's like, are you making good use of your time? Are you being effective and having a high chance of closing? And are you just having a great candidate experience such that even if you don't hire them, like you said, all these things, they spill over. And so even if they don't hire you, even sorry, if they don't take your offer, they'll say, wow, that Gabby, that Prelay, they've got it together. She's done their homework. The really talented team. I was amazed by how many people we would turn, either we would turn down or they would turn us down, that because it's a great candidate experience, they, would tell other people and either say, hey, you should talk to them, or they would tell us, hey, I actually got a buddy. Look, I'm not interested because my family, I've got to move to the East Coast, whatever it was, but like, you should talk to this person. And that's where it all pays off is when you've kind of got that karma going for you. So, all right, I think it's time for the audience questions and to let Patrick take over from here. So Patrick, throwing it back to you.
Thank you both so much. Bruno, Gabby, you both covered so much territory. That was an incredibly fun and dynamic conversation. Thanks for diving into so many different dynamics and topics about how to compete with Fang, how just how to do so much with building early teams. We have a bunch of people joining us live who have some questions and some specific context and scenarios and case studies that they want to share. We're also going to be taking questions from the audience as well. So please share your questions in the chat. I'll have my eyes out looking to bring those questions up for everybody. So with that, the first person I'd like to invite up live is Brent. Brent, do you want to jump in and share your question or challenge?
Yeah, definitely. So Gabby, Bruno, thank you. This was been great listening to you so far. Going back to the co-founder search and discussion, how did you, I guess, first of all, decide that you needed a co-founder? And then how did you decide that you really just needed one co-founder?
Yeah, good question. So for me, I wanted, well, first off, for the co-founder, I kind of mentioned this, alluded this initially. It was around just general sense of it's a hard journey to go alone on it off the bat. For instance, I was actually at early stage startups in the past and scaled out their go-to-market. So I saw the founders, I saw what they had to do day to day, and really realized that the journey's long. You need someone alongside of it to be able to really pound through the hard days with and really be able to trust. And so that's the first piece. The other piece was like, why for like my product / industry, what particular co-founder I really felt like I needed. I wanted someone, because I felt like for me, I could focus on a lot of different things, but overall, I wanted someone that could just really lead kind of the core technical infrastructure and really think through our core security specs from the very beginning. I think not enough people really think through that. And overall, wanted somebody also that had a lot of B2B SaaS experience like I was really dealing with from the start. So I would say for the most part, it was a matter of navigating, finding a co-founder that was more so alongside of me for the journey. And then also someone that was complementary to me in that sense. The reason why I decided to do like one co-founder is I didn't really find the second co-founder to be a necessity. I think sometimes people will bring on like a COO because the highly operational product, there's a lot of operations in the back end that sometimes you look at these products and you don't even know about it. But for us, we don't need that. Sometimes people will bring it on because it's a friend and they want to bring on a second, friend. For me, it was not a necessity and we didn't really need it from the start. Now, does it make it a little bit tighter with the amount of responsibilities that you have to have on both sides? Probably. We didn't have 3 people attacking it, but I'd say for the most part for our product, it just made sense. And from our industry, we both had the expertise and it ended up working quite well in that sense.
Yeah, for us, it was a holistic process. It's like, who do you need to get the company off the ground? Like pretty practically, who's going to save you the money? Like, you might not have 200-300K to hire a senior person, but you might be able to bring them on as the co-founder. And like, what are the skills you need, not just in the short term, but also in the long term? The people that are one day going to be the CTOs, the COOs, the heads of sales, or even just, the champion for culture. I think there's that practical aspect of it. And then there's a personal aspect of it. You're going to need co-founders that like, not only to solve problems, but sometimes complain. Like if you're like, man, our biggest customer is about to drop us, dude, our investors are pissed at us, oh man, I don't know what to do, like we haven't found a new office, we're getting kicked out of our old one because the rent is up. Like these are things like you can't really have those conversations with your employees because they might not get it, or they might get it and freak out, but the co-founders, like they're going to be there to stay, and you can have that openness with them and be in it together. And I saw your follow-up, Brent, and Gabby, give you a chance to answer as well on like, how do you think about the equity split? I think for our team, we did an even equity split among the 3 of us. And we thought about it both the short term and the long term. I think the short term, we were like, hey, look, like we're all in this together. We're all coming from different places, but like, long term, or short term, like we split it up, product, sales, and tech. But long term, 2 years in, like where you were when you quit doesn't always matter that much. And, I've seen those differences 2 years in, 3 years in, 4 years in, close to the acquisition, when someone's like, man, like I forget how this stuff got off the ground, but we've been putting in the same amount of work. But like, why does this person have 5% more than I do? Like, that's something to think about. How do you deal with that in the future? So Gabby, here's how you think about equity and co-founders.
Yeah, I think oftentimes people think of equity a little bit too strategically.
No.
I would think from my point of view, it is a relationship builder in some ways, right? It's about getting that buy-in for the long term. Just like Bruno said, it's going to be a long-term bet for you. I mean, 5 plus 10 years down the line, you don't want to be questioning why you have like 5% difference or anything of that sort. You also want them to have skin in the game. I mean, in the end, like, to have that skin in the game, feel motivated. It really, I mean, it's similar to early employees. If you ever tried to, even in general, employees getting equity, you want to be able to feel like you have skin in the game. And especially as a co-founder, putting in so much time, you want to feel that way too. So having that unequal balance oftentimes can be off keel. Obviously, again, it depends on when they're hopping in. If they're hopping in way down the line, it's going to be a little bit different there. You've already had multiple different customers on and your product fully is built out. Then it's kind of a little bit weird to be bringing on someone half and half at that point in time. But I would say for the most part, when you're bringing on someone earlier on, think through the longevity of it, not just the now.
Yeah, I think the one way I'd just quickly recap that is think about like how much risk is that person taking on? And a lot of people think they've de-risked the company way more than they really have. And where I have seen uneven equity splits, it's like they've either had significant money raised or they have paying customers. You know, sometimes just having a product built doesn't necessarily mean that you've de-risked the company.
Awesome. Thank you both. Yangcheng, I'm going to invite you up in a second, but I wanted to continue to follow this train of, why did you decide to find a co-founder and then who's the right fit? The question coming in from Sujatha is about, like, where did you find them to find the co-founder? And I think, Gabriella, like, especially with your experience of being able to find a technical co-founder and being able to bring in a pretty big cohort of technical talent very early, I think it'd be really great to hear your experience of like the full stack. So you decided why, you figured out who it was. Now, where did you go to find them?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's about pinging your network, right? Like, even if you don't have a large network, it's about pinging acquaintances and just kind of putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, honestly. And I did. But it was a matter of, I was hungry to really start this company and get it off the ground. So it was a matter of pinging the network, asking around, really, like, who is someone I can even chat with? For me, I never asked someone if someone's looking, because no one's looking to make it, like, if you're looking for someone that's looking to start a company, don't work with them. You should be working with people that are actually really wanting to have ownership and wanting to actually build something cool. I overall, that was never something that I was looking for. For me specifically, I pinged around asking for people that had particularly B2B SaaS experience. I pinged around to people that had trusted, like, friendships with these people. And also, in the end, for me, it ended up being like a really close friend that insured us, and we already were like, knew of each other and everything. So we got lucky, but I did have a lot of different conversations and allowed myself to kind of calibrate around what I needed, what I was looking for, and really what was the best fit for the company for the long term too. I mean, there's a lot of people like got along with during the process, but they weren't necessarily the best fit for the long term for building a great B2B SaaS company. So it was really, I pinged around on like LinkedIn with some of my friends, on Facebook, some just texted them, just pinged around to kind of my network to start. Past that, it was a matter of kind of chatting with them, meeting with them for coffee at that point in time. Obviously a little bit different now with COVID, whatever, comfort levels there are. But that's kind of how initially kind of broke down that barrier. And a lot of it was just kind of having conversations and hearing about their experiences and hearing about what they're interested in general. And, but then that's when you needed to dig in of like, would you want to hop into this potentially? I think oftentimes people hop into the deep stuff right off the bat of like, here's my pitch, let's make this work. But I think it's about getting to know the person first, getting to know what they really value within their work and their career. That really helps you kind of build that relationship and then be able to build that leverage throughout the whole kind of conversation to the point of then they trust you, they really want to be able to work with you. And then down the line, they can be able to learn more about your business and more of an openness level. And that's where you have more of that openness of being able to pitch your business, knowing that you have all this prepared and ready as well, what I kind of mentioned earlier. So obviously presented a lot of the data I had, all the user research, pulled together presentations. Honestly, at that point in time, what Bruno mentioned earlier, I was not thinking about investment at all. It was just more of like, I wanted to pull together this information. I wanted to show where this fits into the market, what I think from that high level, and specifically why they should be joining practically. Just kind of writing down all those pieces and making sure, even in my mind, like knew exactly what they needed to know. And yeah, I feel like once that kind of happened on kind of the piece of kind of getting them into the business, getting them to understand it, it was a matter of getting to that why now that we kind of talked about. And that's where I really talked about the trajectory of the business, how we could be pushing this go-to-market motion, how we could be getting these customers more specifically, and chatting through how I'm already getting in contact with these people and they seem really interested. Really building that kind of excitement and passion you might have is huge. So I don't think enough people draw out that passion of what you're really wanting to build. And again, it goes back to like building something you really want to build and work on for the coming years, because that passion will naturally come out.
Yeah, I think for us, what we did is like, we were so aggressive at finding the best person we could get. You know, Sims ended up being our co-founder. And I went to my friends and I went to people I knew and I said, who is the best AI ML person you know? And, you know, make me a list, 5 people, 10 people. And the important thing I find to do in those situations is like, make sure the person you're asking isn't self-selecting people out of that list. You know, I said, I don't care if they're interested in joining a startup. I don't care if they're interested in our space. Like, tell me who is the best AI ML person you know, and I will go find them. You know, it was my job as a founder to convince them, to excite them, to, you know, even sometimes get to them. Sometimes they say, I know this person, but I don't know them that well. I'm like, yeah, it's fine. Like, I will go route to that person. And, you know, someone mentioned here, like a cold LinkedIn message. I'd say to that, like, it's important to get a warm introduction for 2 reasons. One, you're going to be much more likely to not only know if that person's a good fit ahead of time, but be able to close that person even when you do get a hold of them. But also, 2, it's important to work with people you know really well, or at the very least, people you trust know really well. Because if you're meeting someone cold, your inability to get an intro to them also means that you're not going to be able to really reference check them. You're not going to be able to get a sanity check or another perspective. And knowing those values, like, are they the person you want to be within the trenches? It's very, very difficult to do if you're coming into that relationship cold.
Yeah, I would say cold in general, you can do, and I actually think it's a good practice to do, of practicing your pitch and practicing and chatting with people and getting that calibration. But exactly what Bruno said is, in general, if you can get closer to kind of your friendship network or even your work network, probably higher percentage that they'll probably be joining, and it'll be a good fit. But I think that it's always good to chat with plenty of people, to have that optionality and make sure that you're really calibrating your needs and also the people around you as well. I think that's super important.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, and also you can always like find another. Sometimes people might say, I'm not interested in joining a startup. You can always set it up as like an informational chat. Because usually if the person you're looking for is that experience, then you probably do want to say, hey, well, I'd love to pick your brain on what we're building, get your perspective, who do you think, maybe I should be talking to? And, sometimes in getting their perspective, not only do they get to know you as a person, they get to know the company. And it's almost like, investors, when you ask them for advice and you're like, well, who should I raise money from? They're like, me. There could be that person where maybe what hooked them was that coffee chat. Then when you're like, oh, let me know if you know anyone that might be interested in working with me. Like, that conversation in and of itself might get them over the edge.
Thank you both so much. Bruno, the last point there reminds me of I come from the nonprofit fundraising world, and one of the sayings was, if you ask for people's money, they'll give you advice, but if you ask for advice, they'll give you their money. And so I think a great transition. If you ask for coffee and advice, it may lead to a further commitment. Fantastic. So I'm going to bring up Yangcheng one more second. Yangcheng, I know you've been waiting super patiently, but after this, so Sujatha brought up a great point. And if you're looking for a co-founder, or if there's a specific thing that you need to take the next step, the speed networking that's going to happen afterwards is a great place for you to have that at the forefront of your conversation. You will have 5 minutes to be like, hey, I'm worried about this. I need help with this. What's your deal? And it'll be a great way for you to get some of the resources, connect with new people. And so definitely wanted to throw that out there. How the community works is in what you choose to share. So you sharing what's most important to you, the things that you're looking for, allows other people to provide support. So that's what this is all about. Stay tuned for the speed networking. Yongsheng, jump on in. What's your question?
Hey, I have a follow-up actually. I think we didn't really talk about leverage the third-party recruiting agency. Do you guys actually find that a viable channel at all, or is that too expensive for early-stage startup? Another question I had is, about advisors. So, I think those people, especially high-profile people, their time is very limited. And how what is the kind of expectation you have on them when you bring them in as an advisor? Another thing is that how do you make them feel they have enough skin in the game, actually, being able to, commit enough time to actually guide you to, accomplish things.
Yeah, I can hit on that first question and then run through that second as well. So briefly on the recruiting agency, personally at Prelay, we use a sourcing agency. It's great. You really have to think through as to what you want to delegate within your recruiting process. Really those big pieces in the process are when you're interfacing with them directly. So it's a matter of making sure that, especially on those intro calls, or at least the second call, that you're able to interface with them. I wouldn't delegate that very early on. You want to be able to have that, interfacing directly with candidates, especially the ones that you're going to be bringing on early on. But a decision that, I made over at Prelay was around kind of bringing on a sourcer, making sure we can delegate at least getting in front of these people, and making sure that we have more optionality there. Because as you know, again, there's a lot of factors at play. So you need to make sure you're having lots of conversations to make sure you bring on the best. But I would definitely suggest thinking through kind of the prioritization around what you want to be delegating throughout that recruiting cycle. I personally wouldn't suggest doing that, delegating all of that off the bat, especially as you want to bring on great talent that really fits your company and fits you specifically. And it's hard to delegate that to somebody else in the early days. Regarding the advisor briefly, and the advisors in general, it's about finding the right ones. I've been very lucky, and the advisors that have been incredibly helpful and put on a lot of time, honestly, with Prelay. I think it's a balance of also selling these advisors, right? It's a balance of making sure that they know that their time is worthwhile and that you're going to be really excited about working with them too, and they're going to get energy from it. It's about giving them energy back. They want to be, especially when they've already scaled out a successful company, already led multiple companies, they are excited to help founders, especially when you find the right ones. Obviously there's a lot of advisors out there that are advisors and maybe spend like an hour or so a month or something with you. But if you find the ones and you build those relationships, those are the ones that are going to stick with you and really help you through the hard times. And that's where you can really reel in a ton of benefits there. But it's about finding those ones that want to have skin in the game and they just want to help. They want to get this experience of helping out founders because they've done it themselves and they're ready to give back. I think it's the timing there of if they win and if they want to do that. And it's a matter of showing what you're working on too. If they're interested in the space, they're interested in your product and interested in working with you, then they're going to be more likely than none to be able to want to work with you specifically and not too many other companies. So a lot of their time won't be quite as limited, or they'll try to make sure that it isn't quite as limited because they want to work with you and your team.
Yeah, I think my perspective on that is very similar to Gabby. When you're recruiting that, definitely your co-founder, but your first employee, second employee, maybe even third, you want to be so hands-on with that whole process that it's really hard to delegate any part of that to a recruiter. Now, when you've got, you're further down the line, every approach, every tool has its pros and cons. Recruiters, it can be very noisy. They're going to require calibration, and you want to make sure if you're using a recruiter that you're getting referrals of recruiters that have actually had success. You want to make sure that they've recruited for the exact role that you're looking for. Have they recruited senior engineers? Have they recruited a designer? Have they recruited, back-end Go engineers? And you want to make sure, you know where they're pulling their candidates from. in how they're doing that. Some of them are no better than you using, LinkedIn and using any tool yourself. There is some software that you can use to automate your scale and scale your approach. There's a company called Dover.com. I'm an investor, but there's other companies like Top Funnel and similar companies like that can automate you messaging out to candidates and the right candidates. Marketplaces can be tricky. AngelList, Hired, similar things like that, because while they might have good people, those people are getting recruited by everyone else on that platform. And so when we were talking to people on AngelList, they often were already talking to 5 other companies and already had 2 other offers. So, it's the pros and cons. But to your question about cost, contingency recruiters will operate on a percent of the salary once they hire them, usually about 15. I never paid more than 20%, maybe 22 if they're a senior role. And then that incentivizes them to help you close. And sometimes those recruiters can help you throughout the whole process, not just the top of the funnel, but back channeling to get intel, helping close the person. And they can add a lot of value. For advisors, Gabby is spot on. I mean, you can talk about commitment all you want. And if the person's that busy that they're worried about exactly how many hours to expect, then you probably shouldn't expect much from them anyways. Sometimes you need that person. You just need the name for investors, for employees. But almost every investor, if you just get them excited, get them energized, they're going to want to help. They're going to put in way more time than you compensated them for. Keep them engaged, send them email updates, send them swag, try to get to know them personally, invite them to a Zoom event, send them like cool updates from time to time. If they get energy out of advising you and being a part of the company, even if it's when they come home at night and tell their family, oh man, I'm this company called me up today. They're pretty cool. Like those founders seem like a lot of fun. That's exciting. Then you will get way more out of them than whatever you negotiate up front.
Awesome. Thank you both. So we have to switch to the speed networking session in a couple minutes. So for our few live participants, we will have to make a quick pivot to a rapid fire question round. So when you jump in, Gabby, Bruno, if you could rapid fire as fast and as high impact as possible, your answers, that'll be
lightning round. Awesome. Let's go.
Bang, bang. Awesome. Okay. Nazrul, can you jump in with your question and make it rapid fire?
Okay, no pressure. So my question is, imagine you raised $300,000 that Bruno was talking about. You haven't raised VC funds. So now you're trying to figure out how to build your MVP. How do you manage the budget, right? Like, what do you offer to your first initial employees? How do you figure out the overall MVP in $300,000 or $400,000? What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I can take this just from a prioritization standpoint. I mean, overall, you need to be thinking through like how nimble can you be at that point in time. Yeah, I mean, that's like, I guess, typical kind of, pre-seed in a sense. It's a matter of just making sure that you can bring on at least maybe one strong engineer or like one strong person where you can be able to build to one core goal. I think especially with an MVP, I guess it depends on the product, right? Like I could state that the MVP could be really simple, but most of the time it should be. And you should be able to at least build to that MVP fairly simply and not have to worry too much of that budget unless, I suppose if you're outsourcing, I guess in my mind, I wouldn't, but it is a matter of just finding the right person to work on it with. And especially in the early days, I mean, it's a motivation of just equity, right? It's like you're hopping in early, you're able to make sure that you're building out this early product that will become this much larger thing down the line. So oftentimes I would say, don't focus on the short term. Don't focus on the budgeting for the short term. Focus on how can you make as much quality product out of that small amount of money. And I think a lot of times leveraging equity in that standpoint, leveraging great talent that can get a lot done with that amount of money and not having to really use too much of it. Being as nimble as possible there is probably going to be your best bet. Talent and that core piece is the best.
Yeah, my quick answer is like, get them excited. And like, why are you bringing them on?
Yep.
Is it to build an MVP and sell? Is it to build an MVP and raise money? Is it to test out a couple different ideas and make sure they're aligned with that?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. All right, Naresh, jump in, rapid fire question.
Rapid question. So in my experience, I found that the need to find the perfect resources and the need to make progress on whatever you're doing is a difficult balance. Have you had to deal with that, and how did that shift from the beginning of your journey to as you had built a sizable team?
Yeah, I think the number one issue that tends to come into play is hiring amazing talent and in a short period of time to make sure that you can be able to build out the right product, be able to build out the right team and cover needs throughout the process if you have customers or anything of that sort. It's a hard balance. For me, I balance on the quality side. If it's a matter of waiting and being really tight for the next like 2 months and just being incredibly busy, I would much rather be at that point than bringing on a hire that would not be as optimal as I'd like. Because in the end, it's going to be a long term and I wouldn't think through the short term in that end. So it is a balance, but I tend to always try to go push for that quality piece. And that's for hires. From like a pure product standpoint, obviously it's making sure that you're really prioritizing the speed there as well. It's not always going to be perfect by any means as you're building out the MVP or anything, but it's by just doing the simplistic pieces to start that you can at least be nimble with. I think that's the biggest piece. Really depends on the category though.
Yeah, I'd say on my end as well, like you can never reduce headcount. So you want to stay, without a big hit to morale. So you want to stay as lean as possible until you're like absolutely sure either that's the direction you want to go into, you want to bring on more people, or you have like a really, really burning need for one more person. At the early stages, you want to ask yourself, can we build something simpler? Can we sell what we have? Are we absolutely sure we're building the right thing? Are there more signals we can get to make sure you're not just trying to solve short-term problems by bringing on more bandwidth? In some cases, some companies just bring on a contractor for a month and they just need a little bit of bandwidth without bringing on someone that's on the long-term budget. But when you're in the later stages, you got to preempt the role. Like by the time you need someone, it'll be too late. It takes 3 to 4 months to spin someone up. So we hired our director of engineering, I think 4 months before we are absolutely going to need a director of engineering in 4 months.
Great. Thank you both so much for jumping in and dealing with the rapid